And I didn't think I would ever live in New York City. It wasn't a place I aspired to live in. I just found myself there. I had a band in Boston for years, and we had a manager in New York City, and he had worked hard to sort of get us a record deal, and we recorded it. We started recording a record, and then in the city, and it sort of fell apart. And it was in between trying to figure out what I was going to do in my life, and he just said, "Hey, come down, and you can stay here at this studio space that we have, our office studio space in Lower Manhattan on Pearl Street in a financial district when nothing was going on there. And you can stay in here, and then when no one's in the studio at night, you can write some songs and try to figure out what you're doing next." So I did. I started messing. It was mostly like a hip-hop studio, so people would come in and they would mess with samplers all day and do their thing, and then when they would leave, I'd kind of go in and start figuring out how to use these tools that were in the studio. And really, that's where I laid a lot of the groundwork for how I figured out a recording studio. Well, because I wasn't writing, I was always used to being in a band, and I didn't want to be a solo artist ever. That was never my intentions. I just started working with these sort of mostly hip-hop tools, looping my old band into the different songs that I would then create into new songs. And I had written a couple of them, and they seemed at the time I remember Beck was sort of like more in his popularity and stuff like that, and I said to my manager, I said, "I think a couple of these songs are really good. Maybe you should try to see if someone will cover them at a label or something." And he was very clever and very good. He was a good manager, and he went out, and within a few months of me being in New York City, he said, "Hey, I got you a record deal. So now you're going to make a record." And I only had 3 songs that I was just I just was messing with them in the studio. That's the way the world works, right? And but I think that they, at the time, again, because of maybe Beck's popularity, they sort of said, "Okay, cool. Now we have this guy that's doing singing Beck. This is cool. We'll give some money to make a record." And I then took 6 months to drive across country and write the album. And the reason I did that was one night I was coming home on the subway in New York City, getting off at Bowling Green, and as I was getting close to the city, it was probably 1 in the morning. There was a homeless guy sitting across from me, which we've all seen many times, and he had his little cart of life supplies, which I was fascinated with. And something in my head said, if you don't talk to this guy, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And that kept spinning around in my head. Otherwise, I don't normally go talking to anybody on the subway, let alone a homeless guy. So, and he was probably 80 years old, and I had a whole Jack Kerouac thing running through my head, and I kind of went up to him just as I was getting before Bowling Green and said, "Hey, have I seen you somewhere before? Might I know you?" I didn't know what to say, but he started talking to me and opening up about his life and his struggles, and it really was a sort of Jack Kerouac character. And he told me that he was poor his whole life, and he's been traveling the country, and he says, "I like to call myself the Lone Star Hitchhiker of the United States." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to steal that." And that is the name of my first album that I ever made. And I took his story, and I ended up staying on the train with him well into Brooklyn until finally his red flags went up and said, "This stranger needs to go. This is weird." And I kind of came home, and I remember crying all the way home in the subway about this guy's sad, but also inspirational life. And I said, "Okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to drive across the country on Route 66. I'm going to just follow the old path and road and take my time, and I'm going to recreate these stories that he told me and make them into songs." And I finished the record, and I had this one moment where I was out in California with a friend of mine. And I said, "I'm missing a song. I need to have one song that is like this positive little thing for this guy that didn't maybe happen, but I want to make it happen." So I wrote this next song. This is a song called "Nicotine Prom Queen." And it's a song that I wrote as a ode of a fictional history for this guy where he had found the love of his life and his hitchhiking. Like along the way, he found the love of his life, and it became a wonderful thing. Which is not a story he told me, but I decided to impart it upon him because I wanted him to have that experience. So, "Nicotine Prom."